Thank you to our panelists for their insightful contributions. Your expertise has provided valuable insights into the opportunities and challenges regarding new investment regime for Chilean pensions. We have organized 3 panels in a row because there will be a very good drinks and cocktail after the 3rd panel. That's why we are not going to have coffee breaks in between. So just thank you for staying with us through the 3 consecutive panels. Now, in our next panel, we will be talking about capital markets and regulation, building a new framework for growth. Building a resilient and competitive capital market is key for Chile's growth, so let us explore how regulation can support this goal. Let's welcome Solange Bernstein, President of the Financial Market Commission, Alfonso Duval, CEO of Moneda Patria Investment, Sergio Ursúa, economist, University of Maryland, and Werner Alhers, partner of Sullivan Cromwell LLP. We will follow this conversation with this group. Okay. The Chilean capital market for several years was a key driver of growth and was the source through which the main investments were financed and funded through many years, especially those years in which we have a strong economic expansion. The Chilean economy, as everybody knows, has been most resilient in terms of growth and expansion in the last few years. And we have had, as a counterpart of that, relentless and slower expansion of our capital market. We had several rules that changed and strengthened our capital market through the years, as we have a tender offer law, we have the opening of the Chilean capital market to foreign investors, we have the exemption to capital gains tax, we have a law for the asset management industry, and we also have a very strong and new law that created the Financial Market Commission. So we have been strengthening the regulation of our capital market through the years, but despite that, we have had a reduction in the speed and the strength of growth in our market in the last few years. Looking forward, we would love to have a new era of expansion of our Chilean economy. That's why we have focused this panel mode towards creating and developing a market that may provide growth, and with 2 main drivers. One is to fund the expansion of the Chilean economy, which is one of the purposes for which capital market exists. But the other one is to create a market that may be a contributor to the GDP growth by creating better employment, better companies, and better growth for the whole economy. So that's the topic that we may want to cover. And we may start with Solange Bernstein. She brought a brief presentation with which she will start on the steps and things that the Commission for the Financial Market has been developing to provide this source of strength for the future growth of Chile. So welcome, Solange, to the panel.
Thank you very much, Guillermo. And let me start by saying that as the central bank, the banking supervision, it's also 100 years old this year. So we have 100 years of banking supervision in the case of Chile. And in the next couple of years, we'll be having 100 years of insurance supervision and on security supervision as well. So we have a long history. But the CMF, it's quite new. We are just 6 years old, and we are integrated supervisor with a triple mandate. We have financial soundness, a prudential mandate, and also a market conduct mandate, and a market development mandate. And on this end, in terms of market development, in September was Chile Day in London last year.
Yep.
And in September, we announced that we were launching this policy paper on market development, and we defined what do we understand as financial supervisor in the case of Chile, how will we define market development, and which were the tools for market development in the Chilean regulatory space. And with that, we also announced a call for proposals. So now, I want to tell you a little bit about what happened next. So this is like the next chapter after the last Chile Day in London. And what happened? Well, we did have a very good response. So thank you all. Maybe there are some here that sent us proposals. So thank you for that. We received 50 documents signed by different institutions, even from the academia, from practitioners. So that was very, very good, with more than 200 specific proposals. Some of them very specific. Do this change in this regulation? And some broader. But this was very, very interesting for us, and I have been reading through all these proposals, and we are working on them. We do have now bilateral meetings with some of the proposals we needed to understand it better. So our commissioners, Beltrán de Ramón and Catherine Tornel, that are leading this work, they are having bilateral meetings with different institutions that did some of these proposals. We asked for the proposals in 5 different topics: corporate governance, market depth, market infrastructure, financing for smaller companies, and promoting savings. Let me give you a glance of what are the type of things that we got in there, and that can set up the floor for discussion. This doesn't include fintech and open finance, so this is on top of that. So on top of that, we do have a lot to do in order to make progress in our capital markets. And on the first topic, corporate governance, we did get some of the proposals which are very consistent with what we have been doing in terms of regulation, proportionality in regulation. It's the principle of the same activity, same risk, same regulation. Well, that's one of the principles that we have been working on a lot, and we have to go further on that. Simplification and the compilation of the regulation, which is the regulation for intermediaries, which is the regulation for fund managers, which is the regulation. We are doing a lot of work of systematization and compiling of the regulation, which has not been done before, and we did get some of the proposals to go into that direction in order to facilitate compliance. In terms of investor protection, shareholder rights, equitable treatment, to get more participation of non-residents. So that's one of the things that came out. We are an open market, and there are certain frictions there for the participation of non-residents in which we can work on. Transparency, strengthening of disclosure, and there came a lot, self-regulation. What's the role of self-regulation? We know that the CMF law also included a self-regulatory committee that never came out. So, and there's a lot of demand of, well, self-regulation. Well, go ahead, self-regulate. We invite you to do that. Technology, opportunities and risks on the technology side, also for corporate governance, for participation of non-residents, for instance. How do we get more participation of non-residents through technology, which might facilitate that participation? Or other issues like artificial intelligence, how that is dealt with at the board level, for instance. In terms of trading platforms and market infrastructure, this was very related. Most of these proposals are very related also to the proposals on market depth, on how to deepen the market. Those were very interrelated, the infrastructure and also how to deepening our financial market. In terms of financial vehicles, increasing liquidity and efficiency, there we have the repo market. The president of the central bank talked about this before, and we also issued this this regulation for a consultancy process in terms of how to facilitate the repo market, and we are waiting also for the work that's being done at the central bank level, securitization and derivatives market, internationalization, the regional integration of our stock exchanges, Lima, Santiago, and Bogota, how that is going to work out. Access of non-residents to the local market, how do we enhance that? Transparency, how to improve infrastructure, information and access. Some of the comments went on that direction also. Equal access to our infrastructures. We do have a very well-developed infrastructures. Is there access to everyone to these infrastructures? Can we do more on that side? Technology again, modernization and efficiency of payment methods. We talked about this in the previous panel on artificial intelligence and payments. Securities market also, how can we improve that? In terms of market depth, again, regulation, efficiency to attract foreign capital and develop our capital market. There comes in the internationalization of the peso. Also, Rosana Costa talked about that before. So we all have everything set up, and we'll see if there are more frictions, let's hope not, in order to have also more use of our currency in cross-border operations. Market makers, that's something in which the Ministry of Finance has been working in, that came out as well. Liquidity, to foster liquidity of financial instruments, the role of institutional investors and retail investors to enhance liquidity. Derivatives, how to further develop these markets as a risk management tool. In terms of financing of SMEs, proportionality again. How do we have a proportional regulation in order to different size of companies be able to participate in the market and to access to capital, financial vehicles to facilitate the use and access of capital of smaller companies. We have mini bonds that came up in the FinTech law, and also Scalex. How do we enhance Scalex to have more participation there? Financial conditions in terms of policy for financial inclusion of unbanked segments. There came out our TMSE. It came out in some of the concerns about this limit to the interest rate that can be charged to smaller companies in private credit, for instance, for example. Education, how to facilitate public-private partnerships and coordination between all of these efforts that we do in terms of having education for, in this case, for SMEs, but not only for SMEs, but also for households. In the case of promotion of saving, again, education comes up, technology, digital finance, how do we have participation on that end? There we would help a lot the FinTech law. Incentives to promote saving and coordination to strengthen financial inclusion. So a lot of ideas that we are analyzing at the moment. We're having these bilateral meetings. Then we are going to have workshops during the month of June, July. And we are hoping to finalize this work with a roadmap, not with every measure, but we're trying to look for quick wins. And to have a roadmap. That's our goal, and that will be published in the month of March 2026. So Chile has a deep and robust financial sector that demonstrated resilience. We did have periods of turbulence, and the financial sector was a factor that helped us to get out and through those turbulences. The financial supervisors play a critical role in balancing these objectives. It's not an easy task. The CMF approach to financial development includes efficiency, accessibility, depth, and resilience of the market to have sustainable growth. And we are working continuously to promote financial development through an active and ongoing dialogue with the private sector. So happy to be here in this panel today.
Amazing, you saved 1 minute.
I said well, it was going to be 10 minutes.
It was 9.10. Thank you very much. And Sergio, you enlighten us every week in a column that is probably in the most rated page of the most read newspaper in Santiago every week. If you can write a column about potential growth of Chile, And from the perspective of the capital market, what would you put to be an optimistic column?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here. I'm going to be taking your minute. It's because the questions would probably, we can talk about this for hours, but I have 7 minutes, so let me try to go straight to the point. So, for the first time in a long time, I feel actually optimistic about the Chilean economy. This is not going to be an easy ride. It's going to be a bumpy one, but I can see a lot of potential. I think Chile, in that sense, is a crossroad. The November presidential election is shaping up 2025 as a decisive year, where Chile can actually go back and retake the path of our long-standing path of economic growth and progress. And it hasn't been easy, as you all know. I'm sure you follow the numbers, right? Chile has experienced this almost a decade of low economic growth, but you see signals that things are shaping up for the better. Let me just give you three, and let me sort of, in my op-ed, I will go with the three ideas. First of all, I think there's a clear consensus across party lines, sectors, that economic growth, it has to be at the, it has to be a focal point when it comes to the political debate. That was not the case, not so long ago. Number two, private initiatives, especially investments, private investments, are now facing less ideological resistance, and we have to say that. I mean, that was very clear for a long time. And number three, when it comes to fiscal sustainability, there are valid concerns, and I think there's also a view that the country needs something that, the trend, much more than the level, the country needs to deal with this, right? So that bundle, I think, is definitely positive. And this suggests then that whoever runs, the government, the country, starting in March of 2026, there will be an opportunity to come up with a strategy that should involve, of course, promoting investments, strengthening our institutions, and competing. At the end of the day, it's about taking advantage of the opportunities around the world. But this shift, it's not going to happen, it's not going to be magical. It's not going to happen just on its own. It needs action. And so the government, the next administration, will have a significant challenge when it comes to the agenda for promoting economic growth. There will be, I think, a confidence premium. You might probably 2026, because of that, you will get maybe 1.5 percentage point. We already saw that between the second Bachelet administration and the second Piñera administration, how economic growth just increased without anticipating, a different policy landscaping. But that needs to be concreted. I mean, that something needs to be really implemented. So fewer symbolic compromises, I would say, and a more decisive steps toward really a long-term prosperity. So where are the opportunities, right? So the question is, where are the opportunities, and why capital markets, I think, is going to be really at the center, right, of this debate. So first of all, consumption, you see the decline in consumption growth is very clear, right? So if you look at 2004, 2014, you compare, 2015 to 2024, consumption has been declining. So it's probably that's not going to be from the spending part of the GDP. That's not going to be the channel, right? On top of that, without we have to say, reforms on the labor market, households will be constrained for a while. So that's point number one. Then you have net exports. Well, look at the New York Times front page, right? So the trade war is happening, is real, and we need to handle the situation. Net exports then, again, from the spending point of view, is going to be a challenge. There are opportunities, of course, but it's going to be challenging. Government spending, we're reaching the limits. So cannot be considered by any means engine of growth. That's not going to happen. We have to, if anything, we have to somehow adjust public spending and the fiscal deficit in a significant way. So we have, right, investments. And investments, I think, my view, is definitely the way to go. And there we do have big space, right? There are big rooms for improvements. Investments during the last decade have been, let's be nice, tiny, right? Compared to our previous experience, the numbers between 2004 and 2014 are 10 times the numbers we observed during the last decade. And so that's the opportunity. We can go, I have a couple of scenarios, we can go back to this later in the follow-up questions if you want, Guillermo. But when it comes to how we can unlock capital and investments, I think I can imagine at least 6 elements. One of them is critical for the capital markets. So first of all, investment certainty. We need to provide that environment, and we lost that. Somewhere, by 2014, 2015, we lost the DL600. That was, in my view, a big mistake. That's something that needs to be revisited. Profit reinvestments. It was essential. It was also eliminated. We need to think of ways of bringing that back. Tax competitiveness. That's pretty obvious, right? And it's also part of the discussion. It's across the board. I think there's an agreement that our tax rate is too high, and we're losing competitiveness. Regulatory efficiency. I think Minister Grau this morning went through a very interesting project. I think that's the starting point. I think there are way more things that should be done, but it's a good starting point. It's going to be providing an opportunity for the next administration for sure. Saving promotions. We have a conversation on pension reform. Voluntary savings have been out of the question. Housing, education, of course, pensions, all of that should be part of. We should have that conversation, and it's not part of the debate right now. I think that's something we should definitely encourage. And Solange, you sort of mentioned also investment promotion, savings promotion is important, and market protection. So let me go to market protection because strengthening the institutions, I think, is going to be one big challenge. And so let's go to the capital market. How many minutes I have?
You have 7.
I have 7 more?
No, you are in 7.
Already 7. So let me go very quick so we can follow on this. So capital market has been the asset of Chile's economy within the region, right? And this was not circumstantial. This is something that was worked on for a long time, 40 years. The country took the capital market very seriously. And but we have seen how that seriousness has been, say, weakening a little bit, right? We saw that a few years ago, and we constantly see this notion of it has some of the view that the capital market might not be that important as we think. That's I think, my view, a big mistake. And the strength of the local capital market has shown in face of the international uncertainty does not align with the weaknesses we observe on the domestic front. The legislative branch has been an unchecked and formidable adversary of capital markets. And that has to stop. We need to find a way. We need to find check and balances. We need to compensate to deter, prevent, right, and generate the incentives for those attacks to stop. The impact on the economy and the capital market of those decisions has been massive, and I think when it comes to what we need to do, the agenda, that discussion should be central.
Great. Alfonso, we share some common experiences in the sense that from the late 80s to the mid 90s, a lot of domestic financial institutions were created. Many of those companies were then afterwards bought by international companies, and as a result of that, these global companies that has taken over companies in which, well, Alfonso is a CEO of Moneda, recently bought by Patria. I used to work at IM Trust, which was bought by Credicorp Capital. And we have Selfin with BTG Pactual, Compass with Vinci, pension funds bought by US companies, at least 4 of the main pension funds has ownership of US companies. So the main actors of the Chilean capital market today are not necessarily domestic companies. So we will need to bring a push from local players to convince them to increase the involvement in our market. How do you see the future of our industry?
Good question. A lot of questions in one single statement, so I'll do my best in 7 minutes.
And I give you no minutes. I'm sorry.
But you took leverage from Solange, so I have my 7. So look, I could start by answering from a textbook standpoint, saying yes, this type of companies experience a very relevant growth rate over the years. The market got small for these companies, and we were looking to expand internationally. Of course, that takes time. It's very expensive. And some of the options that you can take by expanding and becoming part of a larger platform is that you accelerate such growth rate to become truly an international asset manager. But I think this question deserves a broader scope, honestly, because the capital markets are conformed not just by intermediaries, such as asset managers or pensions, but rather companies. And when we look what happened in the Chilean market between 1990 and 2014, we have several investment cases, successful ones, of Chilean-owned companies led by Chilean management that grew all over the country, of course, expanding regionally, and some of them even going internationally with success. So that's certainly a case study. It's a case study that we should have in our consciousness continuously. We tend to forget about this, and we should be proud. There was clearly an atmosphere of growth. The discussions were about how we expand, how we do more things, how we acquire a company in Brazil or acquire companies from Chile. Chile always the headquarters, how we go global. And I think we lost a little bit of that. Of course, that was possible because we were supported by very favorable long-term public policies. And I would like to name some of them, because we tend to forget about this. Guillermo mentioned some of them, but 1990, we have progressive liberalization of capital controls. 1999, elimination of the retention on foreign capital, the encaje, for those of you that don't remember. Year 2000, tender offer law, Ley de OPAs, was enacted. Year 2000, offshore exchange in Santiago is launched by the Santiago Stock Exchange. 2001, this is a landmark. MK1, Mercado de Capitales 1 law, was enacted, and we eliminated the tax on capital gains in the stock market. 2001, structural superavit reform. 2011, MILA, LATAM Integrated Markets, is launched. 2014, investment funds law, Ley Única de Fondos, is approved, reinventing the local industry of mutual and investment funds. So what I want to tell you here, or what message I would like to convey, is that there was a genuine focus on converting Chile into a financial hub in the region. Unfortunately, something happened around 2014, as Sergio mentioned, that dented these animal spirits of Chileans. And I can summarize this, or the reasons, in 2 clusters of reasons. First, excess regulation. 2, change in the rules of the games. You might ask, what do you mean with the change in the rules of the game? Well, I'll go broad, especially in regulated sectors, by the way. Energy, this is stabilization of policy on prices. It's a change in the rules of the game. Healthcare, judicialization of price increases. Pensions, we had major withdrawals. And also we had taxes on capital gains put back into our market. So definitely, that's some of the reasons why some entrepreneurs decided to sell. And that also justifies the M&A activity that we had in our market. The changes sometimes were so dramatic that even international investors decided to sell. So we should not take this for granted. And I think it's a relevant reason of what has happened and why we're where we are. Now, let me give you some KPIs, if you will, on the effects of this. So there has been no IPO since year 2019. 20 broker-dealers, 10 asset managers had shut down operations over the last 15 years, give or take. Not merged, shut down operations. Different reasons, but shut down. Traded volume, from $45 billion traded in 2013, we went down to $27 billion last year. So definitely our brand positioning from a marketing standpoint was dented. You know, in terms of efficiency, effectiveness, flexibility, how open we were for business. Do I think, how much time do I have left? Sorry.
Yeah, I'll give you a couple minutes.
Thank you.
A couple of minutes.
Okay, do I think this is, can we revert the course and go back to the path where we were dreaming about this and reinstate our animal spirits? I'll split the answer in two. Definitely it's possible, 100% possible. How probable this is? Well, that depends. I see at least 3 senators here. We have different stakeholders that need to take care of this, and we need to work together. Because this depends on Chileans. Does not depend on foreign-controlled companies. We can be controlled by foreigners, but it are the Chileans that need to make the difference. We have the interest here. Depends on the political class, depends on the financial market actors. It depends on the regulator as well, and also on investors. So the task is on our side, honestly, is in this room. I think that can bring back the animal spirits, and we definitely need to think creatively and be bold and brave on the metrics that we need to take to continue growing. By the way, between that time frame that I mentioned, year 1990 to 2014, Chile grew at an average growth rate of 5.2%. That's huge. I'll finish with the, no, I'll finish there. I'll stop there. I will not finish, I will stop there.
You finish with a good number. And for you, Bernard, well, actually, one comment on what you have just said, Alfonso. I think that Chile has been very lucky because I'm convinced that we still have a real chance to become a hub for Latin America. And since what has been happening in the last 10 or 15 years, it has been possible because of how poorly our neighboring countries have been doing it. Because if some of our neighboring countries has been moving faster in terms of capital markets, we probably may have lost the opportunity. But for our luck or unluck, we are in a region that has been poorly performing in terms of capital market and even probably poorly than ourselves. So that's what I still think that I agree with you that we have this big chance and opportunity still. But Werner, you have been watching and following Chile from abroad, advising Chilean and international investors in M&A transactions, doing investments in Chile or probably divesting from Chile. What's your view on how do we stand or where do we stand today looking forward?
Right. And I think, you know, and so people are aware, I'm a New York lawyer, and I specialize in cross-border transactions. I'm as much an M&A lawyer and a project finance lawyer as I am a capital markets lawyer. I work across all 3 types of transactional areas. And I work across the region. So actually, Guillermo, we've heard a mix of optimism, a mix of retrospective criticism about the regulatory trends in the country, the political situation, and I'm not really going to comment on that as much as I am to try to broaden the lens a little bit and see, how we see it, from with just one seat in a market participant from New York. And Guillermo, you actually anticipated, a lot of the general thrust of my comments, which is that, it's certainly the case, I think, in the last 5 years, certainly you mentioned no IPO since 2019, that M&A activity, some of it divestments, of course, project finance activity, which has had its ups and downs, and bank financing activity has kind of overshadowed, I think, foreign interest in transactional activity in Chile. It's overshadowed capital markets activity, I think, a bit. But I think that the main point I wanted to bring to the conversation, which Guillermo, you anticipated, is that it's happening in a context which is regional, and that's happened everywhere. And in fact, the types of headwinds that Chile's experienced in a variety of ways, macroeconomic trends, now trade uncertainty, but before that, fiscal sustainability concerns, political stability, dislocations from COVID, which had its own particular effects in Chile, of course, social unrest, pension withdrawals, et cetera, have been happening in a variety of ways across other markets in the region, Peru, Colombia, Mexico, Brazil. And throughout all of this period, I would say that the strengths, on a singular basis, you might say that Chile was weakened from the perspective of a foreign investor. On a comparative basis, it really wasn't. And in fact, it's come out, I think, of that period. Not that it's completely come out. I don't want to suggest where we are on the timeline. Hopefully on the beginning of a very positive upward trajectory. But I think that it's come out on a comparative basis, quite strengthened with how it's, one might say, muddled through a little bit those challenges, and in a position in which I think it can take advantage of the comparative strengths that it continued to have, and that may have even on a comparative basis have been strengthened. And I think that people are familiar with those strengths. I think it's easy in a context where you're focused, specifically inside the country, to lose sight of them. But I think compared to other countries in the region, you still have a relatively stable regulatory environment. Obviously there are sectoral challenges, and we spent the day talking about, the need for a lot of reform in certain sectors. A effective consolidated financial regulator, comparative stability in the rule of law, and the like continue to be comparative strengths. And I think is, to your point, which is also going to be one of my observations, I think it in some ways, compared to 10 years ago, Chile is better positioned to play that kind of regional hub role because of, how worse other markets have fared in that context. I think we're still at a point from a, foreign investor perspective where, capital markets in Chile are interesting. They're important. They're important as a barometer for growth and stability. They have a recognized role as being a significant contributor to that growth and stability, but they're not necessarily a driver of the most significant cross-border investment activity for the moment. And that's where, on a comparative basis, even with larger, deeper, and more liquid markets like Brazil and Mexico, you don't have as much of an intersection between the M&A activity and capital markets in Chile. They have a role to play, but I think they're still relatively siloed. And one of the observations I'd make is that my perception is that the reason for that is not a regulatory one necessarily. I think there are regulatory reasons why, tax competitiveness is very important. There's a lot of reasons that you can do to address the kinds of issues that President Burstein was mentioning earlier in the presentation completely. But I think that the reasons for capital markets not being a more important factor, say in M&A activity and the like, are more structural. And I think that for that to actually change, there may need to be greater ambitions. And I think regional integration in particular stands much more of a promise of making a difference in that than the incremental enhancements of regulation. I mean, and it's because, for example, the mandatory tender offer law that you mentioned, I mean, Chile today has much stronger protections for minority investors than, say, Colombia in that regard. And yet Colombia has much more public M&A activity, hostile takeover attempts, things like that. I mean, to say much more is a little bit of an overstatement, obviously, because it's even there limited. But that those things aren't posing the obstacle. I think the obstacle is one of maybe one of depth, and one that integration could have a much bigger role in sort of propelling the kinds of activity that might attract investors. For example, more private equity investors that might see viable public market exits that they have in Brazil and even Mexico, despite all the challenges that Mexico's gone through. What's going to take that to change in Chile? It may take something like, a more expansive regional platform that's integrated and a bit more seamless.
And for you, Solange, with what you have heard and what you have explained, as if we want to still consider that we can make of Chile a financial services exporter, which for me has always been an issue, because we are an economy that promotes exports in every industry, but the Chilean capital market has been restricted to export its capacities. Not many people know, but we are not permitted to go to our neighboring countries to provide financial services. The internationalization of the Chilean peso is a keystone to that process, but we need still a lot of details to change and to make in order to make these things happen. How likely do you think that this may finally happen? And what are the main difficulties that you may see within the Chilean community, the regulators, the legislative community to make this happen?
Well, as regulators, there is some things that we can do and some things that we cannot, of course. And this is a much larger challenge than what we can go through just with our own efforts. And in terms of, let me just go to the point where it was just mentioned that the significant changes in our capital market during the last years, because that is very important to see if we would be able to set up a financial market that's going to be able to provide services to the rest of the region or the rest of the world. And indeed, we do have some recent changes, and let me highlight some of those. We didn't stop in 2014. We continue having significant changes, and indeed, we did have this conversation this morning about the FinTech law, which has been implemented during the last couple of years, and thanks to the work in the Congress that made that something that we have now. And indeed, it's an opportunity. It's a big opportunity that we are leading, not just in the region, but in the rest of the world. Open Finance, we do have following, as it was mentioned this morning, we are following some other very good experiences, but still, it's something relatively new worldwide. So there we do have an opportunity. And we have more than 300 applications for service providers that are coming into this industry and going to be into the perimeter of the CMF. And also this other law, the Consolidated Credit Registry, was more than 10 years in Congress, and now we do have that also as a reality, and we are implementing a credit registry that's going to be not only good for households to access credit, but also for small companies to access credit, where they're going to be able to have better conditions, because they will be able to show their good behavior in terms of complying with their payment commitments. So that's good news that we do have, and that are more recent. In terms of the mutual fund and investment fund industry, that's 40% of GDP. That's an industry that has been growing significantly. We do have challenges, of course, but we do have a market that has been dynamic. And when we see worldwide again, it's true that's not just in Chile that we have few IPOs. In the rest of the world, coming from the IOSCO annual meeting that was last week, and one of the themes of discussion, how public markets are dropping around the world, and private markets are the ones that are increasing. So how do we deal with that? How that changes the landscape of capital markets? So there's a lot of challenges, of course, that there's a lot we can do in terms of sustainability. Again, there is an opportunity here in Chile. We are ahead in implementing disclosure standards. And we are part of the jurisdictional working group of implementation of ISSB standards because we are a country that is in the leading position in terms of this type of requirements for disclosure. So let me just see the not the half empty glass, but the half full glass, so I can see the future with optimism.
And you, Sergio, if we have elections at the end of the year, and let's assume that you are in front of the new upcoming president and ask you of the key things that you may suggest him or her to do in order to make this revolution of the Chilean capital market to become a leading industry on the export services industry.
So I think the first point, the first things to realize and recognize is, I mean, we have been, it's true, you don't have to run faster than the bear as long as you run faster than your friend. So in the region, I think have been lucky, right? Our friends are very slow, right? But the bear got really close, let's say. I mean, it has been a tough decade, all right? So that's important. But I insist, I see a way out. And the building block for this view is actually on a basic fact. I think there are growing consensus that the mistakes that were made over the last decade cannot be repeated. Right? And this view that this widespread assumption that don't worry about economic growth because it's going to be guaranteed, that the evidence has shown that it's not true. And don't worry about capital markets. When you go ahead and do crazy things, let the bear just get very close to you. Well, the capital markets, the financial agents are very smart at identifying the danger, and they flew away, and they know that. So I think, we had a really tough time, and we have an opportunity to revisit some of the foundations of what Chile was. And I'm not saying just copy and paste, that would be crazy. Twitter came in 2004, and so it's a really different world from the economic perspective, but also on the political front. So I think going back to the basics, right? So in promoting investments, that's going to be central. Strengthening our institutions is going to be central, and coming up with a landscaping in which policymaking is actually pushing for economic growth is going to be very important. Just let me give you a couple of numbers to give a sense of how big of an effort this requires. So suppose there's consumption, public spending, net exports, they all move as they have been moving over the last 10 years. You look at gross capital formation, right, which is investment, basically, the difference of that. So that's 1.2% over 10 years annually. That's really tiny. Suppose that you multiply the number by 4, right? So instead of having capital formation growing 1.2, you go 4 times that. So that you do the algebra, from an accounting point of view, that will push your economic growth of 3.3%. If you want to be ambitious and go up to 4%, that will imply an increase, a 9-fold increase in capital investments, basically, capital formation, right? How hard is that? Have we seen something like that in our recent history? That's exactly the growth rate of capital formation we observed between 2004 and 2014. So it's not impossible to think that over 4 years, Chile can display economic growth of 4%. What is the magnitude of this? How do we translate that into dollars? That will be around $55 billion extra of capital formation. I mean, over 4 years, that's pretty ambitious, but again, it's not unprecedented. It's something feasible. So there is an opportunity. I again feel sort of optimistic. The opportunity is before us, of course, and the broad political spectrum now, I think, recognizes the benefits of seizing it and the risks of letting it slip away. So that would be sort of the message.
And Alfonso, what would you suggest that we may do in a very concrete way to make this capital market jump?
Some measures that I would definitely consider. It's first for the approach towards this. Sometimes it's very difficult to deal with the inertia of what exists. Sometimes you need to embrace the zero budgeting type of approach that companies have, to start in a blank paper saying, okay, what would be my ideal? It's not refundational. It's not what I'm trying to convey here. It's to say, look, I don't need to be tied to my past to design what I would like to design for the future. I think we should start using that principle more often. Concrete. Definitely, we need to abolish the tax on capital gains. Provides a suboptimal allocation of resources between small caps vis-a-vis large caps. By the way, what I mean with that is that small caps that do not have market presence, investors pay 27% of taxes in capital gains, whereas if you invest in a large cap, you pay 10%. So the cost of capital for companies increases, especially for small companies. I think that's a distortion. Second, who is thinking about potentially integrating or connecting the Argentinian stock exchange with Chile? Definitely they need capital. If not, these guys are going to go to the NASDAQ, whenever it's open, of course. I think we need to entertain that discussion. Who is thinking about relaunching the MILA agreement? Homologate taxes. It's difficult. I know it's difficult, of course, and the devil is in the details. But that's a way to foster, and to improve. Other things. We need to increase competition in the local market. Competition is what really makes us be more efficient and be better. We should consider outsourcing some services that the broker-dealers have domestically, and we have discussed this before, and asset managers, like back office, the compliance services. This can be centralized in professional entities, such is the case in Luxembourg or in the US or even Brazil. So the market standard is to outsource this and not to have it in-house. I think it improves economies of scale and even provides synergies for market participants that could do. And also I would take a look at the companies' repurchase plans of stocks. I think we can improve that one, provides an additional source of liquidity to the market. Again, this does not or cannot depend on one single participant. We need to have different sources of liquidity to foster this, the attractiveness of this. And I finish with this one. Let's not forget that we're a small economy. So on comparative terms, we need to do better and be more attractive to attract the capital globally. We cannot be tied to the other ones. We need to be more competitive, more attractive. We need to think that and have that as a North Star. That would be my 2 cents.
And for you, Werner, what would you suggest for Chile to do in the near, short, or mid-term to lead the region?
Right. I can't compete with Alfonso's list and his expertise in Chilean capital markets. No, seriously. And again, looking at it from an external perspective and in terms of what foreign investors focus on, I think Sergio's right. It's a tremendous opportunity right now. I think one of the other factors that we haven't talked about that Chile's lucky about is that we're actually in a cycle of increasing demand for its critical, its principal exports, copper and of course now lithium. And I think what I spend more time talking to my clients about is permitting reform and the competitiveness of the key industries that are ultimately going to be drivers for the economic growth that hopefully capital markets can capitalize on to accelerate that growth. So if there's one thing I would, focus on, it would be on getting that right, and that also involves, investment stability and, and other, pillars that had long been the basis for the successful period that Chile lived through in the first few decades.
Solange, being the authority of the panel, I will give you the right, just for you, to a last comment on how do we complete the glass.
Wow. Fortunately, it is half full, I said.
Right. So it's just one half.
Well, I did mention a lot of initiatives that came from the private sector. So this is a call for action. I could say that's a call for action, of course, for us as regulators, for the Congress, but also for the private sector. So I think if we all work together towards getting a full glass, maybe we will be able to reach that goal.
Okay, thank you very much. We have the real hope that in 1 or 2 or more Chile days we will come to tell you, and I want to thank Solange because she has been very strict on giving a report of what she said in the panel last year, how we have been improving this year in many topics. And I agree with her that there are many things on the details of these things that the Financial Commission has been approving and the Central Bank has been also changing, and that needs the commitment of the Chilean private sector to make them work and to implement them for the future. So we will take the task and we'll try to make all these things happen. Thank you very much. We have a panel that is waiting for us to come, and I need to remember that no coffee break because there are drinks and cocktails right after the next panel, not now, next panel. So stay here and thank you very much.
Thank you very much.